Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a big show filled with tons of breaking news. We had the breaking news earlier today, just a couple hours ago, that Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, signed a huge 4-year, $212.4 million extension, something that I was shocked by. I did not think the Dolphins were going to pay out Tua before the end of this season. He gets his contract. We will talk about how that affects the quarterback market, how it affects the Dolphins moving forward, and much more. Then we're going to do a little bit of the trade deadline preview. We've been doing a bunch of it this week. There were a bunch of massive trades yesterday and today, including the headliner so far, Randy Arozarena being traded from the Tampa Bay Rays to the Seattle Mariners, a much-needed trade for the Mariners. The Mariners made another trade as well as the Diamondbacks making a trade, the Orioles making a trade with the Phillies, as well with the Rays. We're going to break down all of those moves and any other moves that come in while we are live before we get into the rest of our segments, that being the continued preview of the NFL season. Today, taking a look at the not the Los Angeles Rams, taking a look at the Arizona Cardinals, finishing up the NFC West. And of course, it is Friday, so we are doing our MLB Power Rankings. It's the first time in 21 days that we have done Power Rankings, so it has been a bit of time. We're going to go over everything, our first post All-Star break. So that's a lot of stuff today, but before we get into all of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate every single one of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Friday afternoon. But like I was saying, we're going to start off our show with the big news out of the biggest league, the National Football League, as Tua Tagovailoa has officially signed a brand new 4-year, $212 million deal, averaging $53.1 million. That point one is important in this reporting because that puts him exactly $0.1 million more than Jared Goff, who signed his $53 million extension earlier this offseason. This makes Tua the third highest paid quarterback in the NFL, only trailing behind Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, who signed his contract with one of the other Florida teams across the state there in Jacksonville. This is a huge move for the Dolphins, and it's something that if you've been watching the show, you know I did not expect this to happen. This is one of those moves that, for me, I don't know if it really is the right one, right? You have, with the Dolphins, right, a team that is so loaded offensively, has so many crazy great weapons. You have to ask, is Tua really the best guy to run that offense? And it's not to say that Tua is incapable of running that offense. We saw him run the offense smoothly. Heck, they put up 70 points in a game, right? Last year against the Broncos, right? This is a team that, under Tua's leadership, under his time at quarterback, has been successful, at least with this 1 year. So it's not saying that Tua cannot be that guy, but committing to him long term, making him the third highest paid quarterback in the league, I think is definitely an overpay. Anthony in YouTube comments says it's an idiotic move on the Dolphins' part. The kid has improved. He deserves this contract. I don't care about the stats. And to a certain extent, yeah, I get what you're saying, right? It's one of those moves in the NFL where you don't want to be stuck in mediocrity. Think of these teams that are stuck in mediocrity, like the Steelers, right? They're just kind of okay. They're 9-8 every single season. They're not making that big push. You don't want to be stuck in mediocrity, but you also don't want to be stuck with a situation like the New York Giants have been recently, right? Ever since, for a very long time, actually. But the you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you're bad and you don't have a quarterback. And Tua kind of, we talk about quarterbacks handcuffing teams a lot, right? Uh, we talk about we talk about quarterbacks handcuffing teams all the time, right? We talk about Daniel Jones doing that with the Giants, for example. We talk about Baker Mayfield to a certain extent doing that with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, kind of saying, "Hey, look at what I just did. You have to pay me, otherwise we're going to be unsuccessful." And I don't think paying Tua is necessarily a mistake. I just think out there we're taking a look at the quarterback market and we're saying, "Hey, this there's a possibility that a guy like Dak Prescott is out there, and if there is, I'm taking Dak Prescott over Tua every day because as much as Tua does well, there's plenty of things that he doesn't do well. We've talked about his ability to make a read post whatever the play is. He likes to get the play, go to that number one option, and he has shown the ability. He is improving, like you said. Again, Anthony says Tua came in the league 2 decades too late. He would have been a better quarterback, or better quarterback for defenses and running games were dominated. And yeah, kind of archetype. He doesn't have that same kind of mobility to say that he can't. And I don't necessarily agree with that either. I think, you throw Tua in the early 2000s, it's just a different way. We don't really know. I think his arm talent, and maybe he would have been better then, but harder hitting, we've seen his injury history. I don't know if he really would have been that different of a player if he came in 20 years ago as opposed to today. But it's just a weird thing with Tua because he is developing and you are seeing him develop, and when he's on the field, he's good. I don't think there's anybody out there that's saying Tua doesn't deserve a contract. The question is, would you have paid him now? And if I'm in charge and if I'm the GM here, I am at least waiting until the season is over to prove that, he can make that next step. He made a big step last year. First of all, staying healthy with that new system, with the offensive coordinator and head coach staying for a second year finally, he gets some familiarity, and if he can take another step, I'm giving him that huge deal. And sometimes you don't want to take that risk. You don't want to let him test free agency because you don't want to get stuck in a situation where you don't have a quarterback. But I don't mind this contract, to be completely honest with you. Anthony says his performances at the end of the season proved he didn't deserve the contract. It's just Greer and Ross are desperate for a QB. And honestly, can you blame them? To be completely honest with you, can you blame them? Like I said, you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you don't have a quarterback, especially with how all in this Dolphins team is. And you're right. That's the kind of development that I'm talking about right there that I want to see, which is why I wouldn't have paid him until after this season and why this move is so shocking to me personally. I've talked on this show a whole bunch about how I thought he would have to perform this season. Earlier this week, I did a list of quarterbacks that had to perform to get a contract, and Tua was number 3 on that list, right? So we take a look at this, and I do agree with what you're saying, Anthony, here. But also, if I'm putting myself in GM and owner shoes, Greer and Ross, right? I'm not going to sit here and blame them for making this move because it's not really desperation. The question is, are you going to sign Tua for the long term, or are you going to look elsewhere? And if you do not think that there is, excuse me, if you don't think that there is the option, are we back? All right, I think we're back. I apologize for whatever just happened there. But if you don't think there's an option or a for sure option that you're going to get better than Tua, you have to sign him. And I think it's a good thing that they were able to get Tua below market resetting value. But again, this is kind of a contract that's up in the air, and we don't know for sure because he finally had his first healthy season. One last thing before we move off of it, Anthony says, to be honest, I think McDaniel's scheme is limited with a quarterback like Tua because of his physical limitations. And I mean, the way that the offense is run, I mean, they don't need a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, right? I get it. Obviously, that offense would be electric if they were able to get a guy like Lamar Jackson. But You don't if you don't have a guy like Lamar Jackson and you have a guy like Tua that is able to do it, you still have all those speedsters around. You have all those running backs, Achan and Mostert with their blazing speed, as well as, Waddle and Hill on the outside. Limit it a little bit, but it's not going to limit it enough that it's going to stop them from being contenders. And I do think there's a shot that that Tua can develop into that kind of guy. We've seen him be more mobile than he is. He lost a bunch of weight this offseason. We saw him come in, slimmer than we've seen him in since college, really. And, as long as he can stay healthy at that body weight, that should help him be more mobile. Mobility isn't his strong suit, but it's not like he's a guy that cannot do it, if you know what I'm saying. But anyway, let me know what you think of the contract. I think it's a year early. I know they're saving a little bit of money on this, but $53 million a year, biggest contract in the history of the Dolphins, third biggest ever. It's interesting. Anthony says, no, I'm not talking about mobility. He's talking about arm strength, and that is, yeah, you're right. That's absolutely a good point, because the arm strength is a bit of a problem, but that's something that you can work around. You can do those crossers with these speedy guys. They don't need to be running straight downfield. Obviously, if you had a Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes type arm, it would be much better. But it's hard to just go big arm guys and expect to get some of the same results. I don't mind Tua, and you're right, it does limit him. I see what you're saying. It is a little bit limiting. But accuracy, I mean, accuracy is more important than arm strength at a certain point. And I would rather, to be completely honest with you, have a guy that is 80% accurate than a guy that can throw the ball 10 yards further than my guy that is 20% more accurate than the other one. I would take that trade-off any day. And I think that's just, you got to pick your poison with Tua. And his accuracy, you got to do it. Would I have paid him $50 million? Probably not. And again, I definitely would have waited until after the season, but I'm not the GM there, and I don't really blame the Dolphins for feeling like they had to make this decision, because you want a quarterback that has the potential to get you to a Super Bowl, and Tua has that potential. We've seen it. If he can just make a little bit of a way, a little bit of an improvement. All right. Anthony says, can you explain to me this delusional way of thinking? The thought that people that say Brock Purdy and Tua are the only quarterbacks smart enough to run the system. I'm not saying that. I don't think this has anything to do with smarts. I really don't. And I think Brock Purdy and Tua are very similar and in very similar situations. I just think they are a really good baseline. We talk about game managers. Tua and Brock Purdy are never going to be elite quarterbacks, right? We're not going to sit here and have this conversation. Are Tua and Brock Purdy the best quarterbacks in the NFL? No, we're not going to have that. But they don't need to be that in the system they're in. And you can always say, oh, if only we had Patrick Mahomes, think of how much better the system would be. There's only one Patrick Mahomes. You can always look up and say, oh, if only we had this, keeping up with the Joneses kind of situation, right? It doesn't mean that Tua is a bad quarterback. It doesn't mean that Brock Purdy is a bad quarterback. You're not going to get that perfect check every single box quarterback. And I think Tua checks enough boxes that the system with Mike McDaniel, and Brock Purdy checks enough boxes that the system with Kyle Shanahan works with them. And that's just my thoughts on there. Obviously, you can improve, but it's a pick your poison. You're not going to get a plus 100% perfect guy for your system every time. And I would rather have 90% of the way there, 85% of the way there, than a shot in the dark that we might get 100%, right? Because there's no guarantee out there. I'm not looking at this free agency class, other than possibly Dak Prescott, and saying, hey, that's a guy that I would 100% take over Tua. And I don't know if Dak's even going to make it to free agency. There's all these there's no one in the draft that the Dolphins will be able to take this season that I think can replace Tua effectively. But anyway, we're going to move off of this topic. We'll circle back to it if you guys have any other questions later on. But we are going to move into some trade deadline talk. There's been lots of stuff going around the MLB. We had 3 or 4 trades happen in just the last hour. We're going to break all of that down. The Rays have been active. The M's have been active. The O's have been active. We'll talk about all the massive trades headlined by Randy Arozarena. But anyway, We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.